Did you know that there was a moment in history when the United States completely shocked the Soviet Union? A moment when American determination, courage, and leadership under extreme pressure pushed one of the most powerful nations on Earth to the edge. What if I told you that during this moment, the fate of the entire world rested in the hands of a few individuals making impossible decisions? Decisions that could either save humanity or end it forever. Would you have had the courage to act knowing that one wrong move could trigger the end of everything? Imagine this. You wake up one morning, just like any other day. You go to work, you talk to your family, you turn on the television, completely unaware that within hours, your city, your country, and possibly the entire world could be gone. No warning, no escape, no second chance. This was not a nightmare. This was not a movie. This was real. This was October 1962. For 13 days, the world stood on the brink of nuclear war, and everything could have ended. To understand how humanity came so close to destruction, we need to go back. Back to the end of World War II. A war that reshaped the world forever. Europe was in ruins, cities destroyed, economies shattered, millions of lives lost. But from that devastation, two superpowers emerged: the United States and the Soviet Union. At first, they stood together, allies against a common enemy. But that alliance was built on necessity, not trust. And once the war ended, the truth became impossible to ignore. They were never truly allies. They were rivals, and now they were competing for control of the future. The United States believed in democracy, capitalism, and individual freedom. The Soviet Union believed in communism, centralized control, and the expansion of its ideology. Two completely different visions for how the world should function. Two systems that could not coexist peacefully. And so began the Cold War. But this was not a war fought with tanks and soldiers on a battlefield. It was something far more dangerous. A war of influence, a war of intelligence, a war of fear. A war fought in the shadows through espionage, propaganda, and technological competition. And above all, it was a war built on nuclear power. For the first time in human history, mankind had the ability to destroy itself completely. And both sides began to build that power, faster, stronger, deadlier. In just a few years, the United States and the Soviet Union created arsenals so powerful that they could destroy the entire planet, not once, but many times over. It was an unimaginable level of destruction. And yet, this terrifying balance kept the peace, because both sides understood something very simple. If one attacked, the other would respond, and both would be destroyed. This became known as mutually assured destruction, a fragile balance held together by fear. But that balance could be broken. All it would take was one mistake, one miscalculation, one moment of panic. And in 1962, that moment almost came. It began with a small island, Cuba. After a revolution led by Fidel Castro, the country broke away from American influence and aligned itself with the Soviet Union. For the United States, this was a direct threat. Cuba was less than 100 miles from Florida, close enough to strike, close enough to change everything. The United States attempted to remove Castro from power. The plan was the Bay of Pigs invasion. But it failed, and it failed badly. Instead of weakening Cuba, it made Castro stronger, and it sent a message to the Soviet Union: America was not invincible. For Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev, this was an opportunity. He knew the United States had nuclear missiles in Europe aimed at the Soviet Union, so he decided to respond, but not in a predictable way. He wanted to shock the world. He wanted to change the balance of power. He wanted to prove that the Soviet Union could challenge the United States directly. And so he made a bold decision to place nuclear missiles in Cuba, secretly, quietly, without warning. Soviet ships crossed the ocean carrying missile parts hidden under civilian cargo. Soldiers arrived disguised as workers. Construction began immediately, day and night. Everything had to be completed before the United States discovered the truth. For a moment, it worked, but not for long. In October 1962, an American U-2 spy plane flew over Cuba, and what it captured changed everything. Photographs revealed nuclear missile sites, launch systems, military infrastructure, all pointing toward the United States. It was real. It was immediate. It was a direct threat. When this information reached President John F. Kennedy, the world changed in an instant. This was no longer about politics. This was about survival. American cities could be destroyed in minutes, without warning, without defense. Kennedy now faced one of the most difficult decisions in human history. His advisors were divided. Some demanded immediate airstrikes, destroy the missiles, end the threat. Others argued for a full invasion of Cuba, remove the problem completely. But Kennedy understood something deeper. An attack could trigger a chain reaction, a response from the Soviet Union, escalation, retaliation, and ultimately, nuclear war. So instead, he chose a different path, a naval quarantine. American warships surrounded Cuba, creating a line that Soviet ships could not cross. It was not an attack, but it was a warning. At the same time, U.S. nuclear forces were placed on the highest level of alert. Bombers ready, missiles armed, submarines positioned. The world was preparing for war. Then came the moment that would decide everything. Soviet ships were approaching the blockade line. In command centers, tension was overwhelming. Every radar screen was watched closely. Every movement was tracked. If those ships continued forward, American forces would have to stop them. And no one knew what would happen next. For a few moments, the fate of the world hung in the balance. Then, slowly, the Soviet ships began to slow down. They stopped, and one by one, they turned around. It was a turning point. But the crisis was not over. The missiles were still in Cuba, and the situation remained extremely dangerous. Behind the scenes, intense negotiations were taking place between John F. Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev. Messages were exchanged, each word carefully chosen to avoid escalation while seeking a resolution. Meanwhile, the world moved closer to disaster than anyone realized. At one point, an American U-2 plane was shot down over Cuba. The pilot was killed. Pressure mounted on Kennedy to retaliate. Military leaders urged immediate action. At the same time, another U-2 aircraft accidentally entered Soviet airspace, nearly triggering an armed response. And beneath the ocean, one of the most dangerous moments of the entire crisis unfolded. A Soviet submarine, cut off from communication, was being surrounded by American naval forces. The crew believed that war had already begun. They had a nuclear torpedo, and they were ready to launch it. One decision could have ended everything. But one man made a different choice: Vasily Arkhipov. He refused. He delayed. He chose not to act. And in doing so, he may have saved the world. Finally, after days of unimaginable tension, an agreement was reached. The Soviet Union would remove the missiles from Cuba. The United States would not invade the island, and secretly agreed to remove its own missiles from Turkey. The crisis ended, but the impact was lasting. The world had come closer to nuclear war than ever before, and both sides understood just how dangerous the situation had been. However, one thing had become clear. The United States had demonstrated control, discipline, and strategic strength under extreme pressure. Instead of reacting impulsively, it had chosen a measured response. Instead of escalating the conflict immediately, it had forced the Soviet Union